The marble floors of Digital World Corporation gleamed under the bright lights. 8-year-old Zara sat in one of the big leather chairs, swinging her legs back and forth. Her small backpack, covered in colorful patches, looked tiny next to her, in the fancy lobby. She kept looking at the huge glass doors and the people in suits walking around with their phones and briefcases. Her mom was upstairs somewhere, talking to people about a job. Zara didn't really understand what kind of job, but she knew it was important. Her mom had been looking for work for 3 months now, ever since the restaurant where she worked had to close down. They had practiced what her mom would say, and Zara had helped pick out the best outfit from their small closet. The security guard at the front desk kept smiling at her. His name tag said Robert, and he had kind eyes behind his glasses. Every few minutes he would ask if she needed anything or if she wanted some water. Zara always said no thank you. Just like her mom had taught her to be polite to grown-ups, she was getting a little bored when the elevator doors opened with a soft ding. A tall man stepped out, wearing a dark blue suit that looked really expensive. He had short hair and was talking on his phone about numbers and meetings. Zara could tell he was someone important just by the way he walked and how other people in the lobby looked at him. The man finished his phone call and was heading toward the big glass doors when something made him stop. Maybe it was the way Zara was sitting there looking so small in such a big place. Or maybe it was because she was the only kid in a building full of adults. Whatever it was, he turned around and walked over to her. "Hey there," he said, sitting down in the chair next to hers. "I'm David, what's your name?" "I'm Zara," she said, suddenly feeling a little shy. But her mom always said it was okay to talk to adults when other people were around, especially in safe places like this. "Are you waiting for someone, Zara?" "My mom. She's upstairs talking about a job." Zara looked up at the ceiling as if she could see through all the floors to where her mother was. David nodded. "Job interviews can take a while. Are you okay down here by yourself?" "Yeah, I'm fine. Robert is taking care of me." She pointed to the security guard who waved at them both. There was something about this little girl that caught David's attention. She seemed smart and polite, but there was also something else. She looked like she had something on her mind, something important she wanted to say. "You look like you're thinking about something big," David said with a smile. Zara's eyes lit up. This was exactly the chance she had been hoping for. She had been thinking about this for weeks, and here was someone who looked like he could actually help. "Can I ask you something?" she said, sitting up straighter in her chair. "Of course. Do you work here? Do you make decisions about things?" David chuckled. "Yes, I do make some decisions." "Why do you ask?" Zara took a deep breath. Her teacher, Mrs. Johnson, always said that if you want something, you have to ask for it clearly and politely. "Well, I go to Riverside Elementary School, and we have a big problem. Our computer lab is really old, like really, really old. The computers are from maybe 10 years ago, and half of them don't even turn on anymore. The ones that do work are super slow." David found himself leaning forward, interested in what this 8-year-old had to say. "The thing is," Zara continued, "we're supposed to learn about computers and technology. But how can we learn if the computers don't work? My friend Kevin, he's really good at math, but he can't practice coding because the computer always freezes. And Lisa wants to make digital art, but the screen on her computer has a big black line right through the middle." She was getting more excited as she talked, her hands moving as she explained the problem. "My teacher tries really hard to help us, but she can't fix computers that are just too old. She even uses her own money sometimes to buy supplies for our class. That's not fair, right? Teachers shouldn't have to spend their own money." David was amazed. This little girl was talking about technology education and resource allocation like she was in a board meeting. But she was doing it with the pure honesty that only children have. "So what exactly are you asking me, Zara?" "Well, your company is called Digital World Corporation, right? So you must know a lot about computers and technology. I was thinking maybe you could help our school get better computers. Or maybe some of the people who work here could come teach us about technology." She paused for a moment, then added, "I know it costs money, and I know you don't even know me. But there are 300 kids at our school, and we all want to learn. We just need the right tools." David sat back in his chair, completely stunned. In his 15 years as CEO of Digital World Corporation, he had sat through countless meetings about corporate social responsibility and community outreach. Consultants had presented elaborate plans and strategies, but none of those presentations had been as clear or as compelling as what this 8-year-old had just told him. "Zara, how do you know so much about what your school needs?" "I pay attention," she said simply. "And I ask questions. Mrs. Johnson says the best way to solve problems is to first understand what the real problem is. Your teacher sounds pretty smart." "She is. She's the best teacher in the whole school. But even the best teachers can't teach technology without technology, you know?" David found himself nodding. This kid had a point, and she was making it better than most adults he knew. "Can I ask you another question, Zara?" "Sure. Why did you decide to ask me? You don't know me." I could have said no and walked away. Zara thought about this for a moment. "My grandma always says that closed mouths don't get fed. That means if you don't ask for what you need, you'll never get it. And besides, the worst thing you could say is no, right? But if you say yes, then 300 kids get to learn better." David smiled. This little girl had more business sense than half his management team. "You know what, Zara? I think you might be onto something. Tell me more about your school." And so, in the fancy lobby of Digital World Corporation, an 8-year-old girl began to change the life of a successful CEO, and maybe the lives of hundreds of other children too. She told him about Riverside Elementary, about her friends, about her dreams of learning to code so she could make games someday. David listened to every word, and for the first time in years, he remembered why he had gotten into technology in the first place. It wasn't for the money or the status. It was because technology could change lives, could open up new possibilities for people. When Zara's mom finally came down from her interview, she found her daughter deep in conversation with a man in an expensive suit. She started to worry until she saw them both laughing about something. "Mom!" Zara jumped up. "This is David. I told him about our school's computer problem and he wants to help." As David stood up and shook hands with Zara's mother, he realized that this unexpected conversation had given him something he hadn't even known he was looking for: a real purpose, a way to make a difference that actually mattered. And it had all started with a little girl who wasn't afraid to ask for what her school needed. 3 days after meeting Zara in his company lobby, David found himself driving through a part of the city he rarely visited. His GPS kept telling him to turn left, then right, then left again through neighborhoods where the houses were smaller and closer together. Some had beautiful gardens in front, others had toys scattered in the yards. It was a Thursday morning, and he had cleared his entire schedule for this visit. Zara had given him the address of Riverside Elementary School, along with detailed directions that included landmarks like the house with the big dog statue and the corner store where Mrs. Chen always waves at the school kids. She had also insisted that he come during school hours so he could see everything in action. When David pulled up to the school, the first thing he noticed was how different it looked from the private schools he was used to seeing. The building was older, probably built in the 1970s, but it was clean and well-maintained. Someone had painted a colorful mural on one wall, showing children of all different backgrounds reading books and playing together. The playground equipment looked newer than the building, and he could see kids running around during what must have been their morning recess. He parked his car and walked toward the main entrance. Through the windows, he could see hallways lined with student artwork and motivational posters. A sign by the door read, "Welcome to Riverside Elementary, where every child matters," in both English and Spanish. The principal, Mrs. Garcia, was waiting for him in the main office. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a warm smile, but David could tell she was also probably pretty tough when she needed to be. The kind of person who didn't let anything slide when it came to her students. "Mr. David, welcome to our school," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "Zara told me all about your conversation. That little girl has been talking about nothing else for 3 days." "She made quite an impression on me too," David said. "I have to admit, I'm curious to see what she was talking about." Mrs. Garcia smiled. Zara has a way of getting people's attention when something matters to her. Come on, let me show you around. As they walked through the hallways, David was struck by the energy of the place. Teachers were clearly passionate about their work, and students seemed engaged and happy. Bulletin boards were covered with science projects, book reports, and math challenges. But he also started to notice the small signs of a school working with limited resources. In one classroom, he saw a teacher using her own laptop connected to an old projector that flickered every few minutes. In another, students were sharing textbooks because there weren't enough to go around. The library was cozy and well organized, but many of the books were older than the students reading them. "We make do with what we have," Mrs. Garcia said, noticing his observations. "Our teachers are incredibly creative, but creativity can only stretch so far." Then they reached the computer lab, and David understood exactly what Zara had been talking about. The room had about 20 computers arranged on tables around the perimeter. Half of them had out-of-order signs taped to their screens. The ones that were working looked like they belonged in a museum. The computers were thick, bulky, monitors connected to towers that hummed loudly when they were turned on. David recognized them as models that were already outdated when his company had donated similar ones to charity 5 years ago. Mrs. Johnson, the computer teacher, was in the middle of a lesson with a group of 4th graders. She was trying to teach them about internet research, but the connection was so slow that it took 3 minutes just to load a simple web page. "Okay, everyone, let's be patient," Mrs. Johnson said to her students. "Remember, we talked about how technology sometimes needs time to work." David watched as 10-year-old students sat quietly, waiting for pictures to load pixel by pixel. In Saar, a world where kids were used to everything happening instantly on phones and tablets, this must have felt like traveling back in time. One student, a boy with glasses and a curious expression, raised his hand. "Mrs. Johnson, why are these computers so slow?" "Well, Kevin, these computers are older, so they don't work as fast as newer ones," she explained patiently. "But my dad's phone is faster than this, and he bought it used," Kevin said, not trying to be difficult but genuinely confused. Mrs. Johnson smiled sadly. "You're absolutely right, Kevin. Your dad's phone probably is faster." David felt something twist in his stomach. These kids were smart. They were eager to learn, but they were being held back by technology that was frustrating even the adults trying to use it. After the class moved on to their next subject, Mrs. Johnson came over to talk with David and Mrs. Garcia. "How long have you been dealing with these computers?" David asked. "About 8 years, Mrs. Johnson said. "They were donated by a company that was upgrading their office equipment. We were so grateful to get them, because before that we didn't have a computer lab at all." "What would you do if you could have any technology setup you wanted?" David asked. Mrs. Johnson's eyes lit up. "Oh, that's easy. I'd want computers that actually turn on every time, internet that loads pages in seconds instead of minutes, and maybe some tablets for the younger kids who struggle with traditional keyboards. I'd love to teach them coding, but these machines can barely run a web browser." She paused, then added, "But mostly, I'd want enough working equipment so that every child could actually participate. Right now, I have to have students work in groups of 3 or 4 because we don't have enough functioning computers. Some kids never get hands-on time because they're always the ones helping or watching." David thought about his own office where he had a laptop, a desktop, a tablet, and a smartphone, all of which were faster than anything in this room. Mrs. Garcia showed him the rest of the school. The science lab had equipment from the 1990s. The art room was well organized but clearly running on a shoestring budget. The music room had one keyboard for 30 students, but everywhere he looked, David saw dedicated teachers making magic happen with limited resources. In one classroom, a teacher had created an interactive math game using nothing but cardboard and markers. In another, students were doing a science experiment about plant growth using plastic cups and seeds they had bought with their own allowance money. "Your teachers are incredible," David said to Mrs. Garcia as they finished the tour. "They are. But they shouldn't have to work this hard just to give kids a basic education, and they definitely shouldn't be spending their own money on supplies." That's when David met Zara again. She was in the hallway with a group of friends, heading to lunch. When she saw him, her face broke into a huge smile. "David, you came. Did you see the computer lab?" "I did see it, Zara. You were right about everything. This is my friend Kevin," she said, pointing to the boy with glasses from the computer class. "He's the one I told you about who's good at math. And this is Lisa. She loves art, but she can't do digital art because the computers are too slow." Kevin stepped forward, suddenly shy but determined. "Mr. David, Zara said you might be able to help our school get better computers." "We're not asking for a lot," Lisa added quickly. "Just computers that work." David looked at these three kids standing there with hope in their eyes, and he made a decision that would change everything. "You know what? I think we can do better than just computers that work, but I'm going to need your help." "Our help?" Zara asked, surprised. "Yes. If we're going to fix this problem the right way, I need to understand exactly what you need. Not what adults think you need, but what you actually need." The three kids looked at each other, then back at David. "You mean you want us to help plan it?" Kevin asked. "I mean, I want you to be partners in this. After all, you're the ones who will be using whatever we create." As David walked back to his car an hour later, his head was spinning with ideas. But more than that, his heart was full of something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Real. Genuine. Purpose. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant. "Cancel all my meetings for the rest of the week," he said. "I have some research to do." That research would take him deep into the world of educational technology, funding challenges, and the digital divide that was leaving too many kids behind. But it all started with a tour of one school, and the realization that sometimes the biggest problems have the most obvious solutions. They just need someone willing to listen to an 8-year-old who's brave enough to ask for help. 2 weeks later, David was back at Riverside Elementary, but this time he wasn't alone. He had brought along 3 of his best employees: Jennifer, the head of technology services, Carlos, who managed community programs, and Rachel, who was in charge of training and education at Digital World Corporation. They were all sitting in Mrs. Garcia's office, which was much smaller than David's corner office but somehow felt more important. On the walls were photos of students who had graduated over the years, thank you cards from families, and certificates showing the school's achievements despite all the challenges they faced. But what made this meeting special was that Zara, Kevin, and Lisa were there too, sitting at the same table as the adults. David had insisted on this. If they were going to create something that actually worked for students, then students needed to be part of the planning. "Okay, everyone," David said, looking around the table. "We're here because we want to solve the technology problem at this school. But I don't want to just buy some new computers and call it a day. I want to build something that will really make a difference." Zara raised her hand, even though this wasn't exactly a classroom. "What do you mean by build something?" Jennifer leaned forward. "Good question, Zara. Instead of just replacing old equipment with new equipment, we want to create a whole program. New computers, yes, but also training for teachers, support when things break, and ways to keep everything updated so you don't end up in the same situation 5 years from now. Plus," added Carlos, "we want to bring in volunteers from our company to work with students who are interested in technology careers." Lisa's eyes got wide. "You mean like mentors?" "Exactly like mentors," Rachel said with a smile. "People who can teach you advanced skills and help you understand all the different jobs you can have with technology." Mrs. Garcia looked both excited and worried. "This all sounds wonderful, but I have to ask about the cost. Our school budget is already stretched thin, and we can't afford to pay for ongoing support or training." David had been expecting this question. "The cost is our responsibility. Digital World Corporation will fund everything: equipment, training, support, updates, everything. But we want to do it right, which means we need input from everyone who will be affected." Kevin, who had been quiet up until now, suddenly spoke up. "Can I ask something? Why are you doing this? I mean, what do you get out of it?" It was such a direct question that everyone else at the table looked a little surprised, but David appreciated the honesty. "That's a really good question, Kevin. The simple answer is that it's the right thing to do. But there's more to it than that. My company works in technology, which means we need people who understand technology to come work for us in the future. If students don't get good technology education now, there won't be enough skilled workers later. He paused, thinking about how to explain this in a way that made sense to a 10-year-old. But also, I used to be a kid who loved technology, and I was lucky enough to have access to computers and programming classes. I learned skills that changed my whole life. Every kid should have that same chance. Zara nodded seriously. So it helps us now, and it helps your company later. Exactly. It's what adults call a win-win situation. Over the next hour, they started planning what would become the Riverside Technology Partnership. The kids had surprisingly practical ideas. Kevin suggested that they needed computers that could run programming software, not just basic word processing. Lisa wanted art programs and graphic design tools. Zara proposed that they should have both desktop computers for serious work and tablets for kids who were still learning to type. Mrs. Johnson joined them to talk about what teachers would need. The biggest thing is reliability, she said. I can teach with almost any technology, but I can't teach if I spend half the class trying to get the equipment to work. Jennifer took notes on everything. What about internet speed? That's huge, Mrs. Johnson said. Right now, if more than 5 computers try to access the internet at the same time, everything slows down to almost nothing. We can fix that, Jennifer said confidently. We'll upgrade your internet connection as part of the program. Rachel asked about teacher training. How comfortable are you and the other teachers with technology? Mrs. Johnson laughed. Well, I'm the computer teacher, so I'm pretty comfortable. But some of our teachers are still nervous about anything more complicated than email. They want to learn, but they need patient instruction and lots of practice. What if we set up training sessions here at the school? Rachel suggested. Weekend. Workshops where teachers can learn at their own pace with lots of individual help. Mrs. Garcia looked interested. Would your people really be willing to come in on weekends? Carlos nodded. We have a lot of employees who would love to volunteer for something like this. It's much more meaningful than just writing a check. As they talked, David realized that this was becoming much bigger than he had originally imagined. They weren't just upgrading one computer lab. They were creating a whole new approach to technology education. Lisa had been drawing on a piece of paper while the adults talked. Now she held up her drawing. I made a picture of what the new computer lab could look like. The drawing showed computers arranged in a U-shape so everyone could see each other, with a big screen at the front for the teacher. There were also small areas with comfortable chairs for reading and research, and a space that looked like it was designed for group projects. Lisa, this is brilliant, Jennifer said, studying the drawing. You've thought about collaboration and different learning styles. Can I keep this to show our designers? Lisa beamed with pride. Kevin had a different kind of contribution. I've been thinking about the coding classes. What if we had different levels, like beginners could learn basic programming, but kids who already know some coding could work on harder projects? And what if some of the advanced kids could help teach the beginners, Zara added? Like peer tutoring, but for technology. David looked around the table at these 3 kids who were coming up with ideas that his highly paid consultants had never thought of. You know what? He said. I think you 3 should be official advisors to this project. What does that mean? Zara asked. It means that as we design and build this program, we'll keep asking for your opinions. You'll help us make sure we're creating something that actually works for students. The meeting continued for another hour. They talked about timeline. The new equipment could be installed over the summer, with teacher training starting in August. They discussed the mentorship program. Volunteers from Digital World Corporation would come to the school twice a week to work with interested students. They also planned for sustainability. Instead of just setting everything up and walking away, Digital World Corporation would assign a permanent liaison to the school, someone whose job it would be to make sure the technology kept working and the programs kept improving. As the meeting was ending, Mrs. Garcia had one final question. Mr. David, this is incredibly generous, but I have to ask, what happens if your company's priorities change? What if you decide you can't afford this program anymore? David had been thinking about this too. That's why we're setting up a formal partnership agreement. This isn't just charity that could disappear when budgets get tight. This is a business investment in the community. We're committing to at least 5 years with the option to extend. After everyone else had left, David found himself walking through the school hallways again. But this time, instead of seeing problems, he was seeing possibilities. In a few months, this place would be buzzing with students learning coding, creating digital art, researching projects at lightning-fast internet speeds, and working with mentors who could help them imagine technology careers they had never thought possible. The best part was that it hadn't been his idea. It had been Zara's idea, improved by Kevin and Lisa and Mrs. Johnson and everyone else who actually understood what students needed. As he walked to his car, David realized that this project had already changed him. For years, he had been making decisions in boardrooms about products and services that he thought would help people, but he had never actually asked the people he was trying to help what they wanted. Now he understood the difference between giving people what you think they need and giving them what they actually need. And that difference started with listening. 3 months later, when the new Riverside Technology Lab had its grand opening, David would look back on this planning meeting as the moment when everything changed, not just for the school, but for him too. Because sometimes the best way to build something great is to ask the people who will use it to help you design it, even if those people happen to be 8, 9, and 10 years old. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning in October, just 6 weeks after the new Riverside Technology Lab had opened. David was in his office reviewing quarterly reports when his phone rang. It was Mrs. Garcia, and she sounded frustrated. "David, we have a problem," she said without even saying hello first. "About half the parents are upset about the new program." David put down his coffee and gave her his full attention. "What kind of upset?" "They're worried that their kids are being used as test subjects for some kind of corporate experiment." Mrs. Rodriguez from the Parent Council called an emergency meeting last night, and apparently it got pretty heated. This wasn't what David had expected to hear. The technology lab had been running smoothly for weeks. The kids were excited, the teachers were happy, and test scores were already starting to improve. What could parents possibly be upset about? "Can you give me some specifics?" he asked. Mrs. Garcia sighed. "Some parents think the Digital World Corporation is collecting data on their children. Others are worried that we're teaching kids to be dependent on technology instead of learning basic skills. And a few people are suspicious about why a big company would want to help a school in this neighborhood." David felt his stomach drop. They had been so focused on the technical aspects of the program that they hadn't spent enough time communicating with parents about what they were actually doing. "There's more," Mrs. Garcia continued. "Mrs. Chen, who runs the corner store, heard from someone that we're planning to replace teachers with computers. And Mr. Williams thinks we're trying to get kids addicted to screens so they'll buy more technology when they grow up." "But none of that is true," David said, though even as he said it, he realized that truth wasn't the issue here. Perception was the issue. "I know it's not true, and you know it's not true, but we haven't done a good job of explaining to parents what we're actually doing and why." That afternoon, David found himself back at Riverside Elementary for an emergency parent meeting. The school's multi-purpose room was packed with about 60 parents, and the mood was definitely tense. Some people looked angry, others looked worried, and a few looked like they were ready for a fight. Mrs. Rodriguez, a woman in her 40s with fierce eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, was clearly the leader of the opposition. She stood up as soon as David walked in. "Mr. David, thank you for coming. We have some serious concerns about this technology program that we need to discuss." David had been in plenty of difficult business meetings, but somehow this felt much more intimidating. These weren't investors or competitors. These were parents worried about their children. "I'm glad you called this meeting," he said, trying to keep his voice calm and respectful. "I want to hear all of your concerns and answer any questions you have." Mrs. Rodriguez wasted no time getting to the point. First question: "What data are you collecting on our children, and what are you doing with it?" "We're not collecting any personal data on students," David replied. "The computers track basic usage information, like how long students spend on different programs, but there's no personal information attached to that data. It's just used to help teachers understand which software is working well and which isn't. Man in the back raised his hand. How do we know that's true? How do we know you're not building profiles on our kids to sell them things later? David realized that his word alone wasn't going to be enough. That's a fair question. Would you be comfortable if we brought in an independent technology expert to review our system and verify that we're not collecting personal data? This seemed to calm a few people down, but Mrs. Rodriguez wasn't finished. Second concern, we've heard that you want to replace teachers with computers. Is that true? Absolutely not, David said firmly. Technology is a tool to help teachers, not replace them. Mrs. Johnson is still teaching all the computer classes. Our volunteers work with her, not instead of her. A woman near the front spoke up. But what happens when your company decides, this program isn't profitable anymore? Do you just take all the computers and leave our kids with nothing? This was the question David had been dreading. We've committed to supporting this program for at least 5 years, but I understand your concern about what happens after that. 5 years isn't very long, Mrs. Rodriguez pointed out. What guarantee do we have that you won't just disappear when it's convenient for you? David looked around the room at all these worried parents, and suddenly he understood something important. They weren't really upset about data collection or teacher replacement. They were upset because they felt like something was being done to their children without their input or consent. You know what? He said. You're absolutely right to be concerned. We made a mistake. The room got quiet. This wasn't what anyone had expected him to say. We spent a lot of time planning this program with the school administration and with some of the students, but we should have included parents from the very beginning. This is your community. These are your children. And you should have been part of every decision we made. Mrs. Rodriguez looked surprised. Are you saying you want to start over? I'm saying I want to fix this the right way. What if we formed a parent advisory committee? What if every major decision about the program had to be approved by parents, as well as teachers and administrators? An older man who hadn't spoken yet raised his hand. What about the concerns that kids are spending too much time on screens? My grandson comes home and wants to play on the computer instead of doing his homework or playing outside. This was actually a concern that David shared. That's a really important point. Maybe we need to work together to set guidelines about balancing screen time with other activities. The goal isn't to have kids on computers all day. The goal is to give them technology skills they'll need for their future. A younger mother stood up. I work 2 jobs, so I can't always help my daughter with her homework. She's been learning so much in the computer lab, but I don't understand half of what she's talking about. How can I support her learning if I don't know anything about technology? This gave David an idea. What if we offered technology classes for parents too? Not just so you can help with homework, but so you can learn skills that might help you in your own jobs? The mood in the room started to shift. People were still skeptical, but they were listening. Zara's mother, who had been sitting quietly in the back, finally spoke up. My daughter talks about this program every day. She's excited about school in a way I've never seen before. But I understand why people are worried. We've had promises before that didn't work out. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded. That's exactly right. Companies come into our neighborhood, make big promises, take some pictures for their websites, and then disappear. How do we know this is different? David thought about this for a long moment. Honestly, you don't know it's different yet. You'll only know based on what we do over time. But I can tell you this. 6 weeks ago, I didn't even know this school existed. Now I think about it every day. This program has changed my company's priorities and my personal priorities. He paused, looking around the room. But words are easy. You want to see actions. So here's what I propose. Let's form that parent advisory committee right now. Let's set up the parent technology classes, and let's establish a rule that any major changes to the program have to be approved by parents, teachers, and students. Mrs. Rodriguez looked around at the other parents, having some kind of silent conversation. Finally, she turned back to David. Okay, we'll try the advisory committee. But we want real power, not just the appearance of input. And we want monthly reports on what data is being collected and how it's being used. Deal, David said immediately. And we want the parent technology classes to start next month. Deal. And if we're not happy with how things are going, we want the right to end the program. This one was harder for David, but he realized it was necessary. Deal. As people started to leave the meeting, Mrs. Rodriguez came up to David. You know, I expected you to get defensive and try to convince us we were wrong. I didn't expect you to admit you made mistakes. I'm still learning how to do this right, David said honestly. Well, that makes two of us. I've never been on an advisory committee for a technology program before. As David drove home that night, he realized that this setback had actually taught him something crucial. Building trust wasn't just about having good intentions or even good results. It was about including people in the process and giving them real control over decisions that affected their lives. The program would be stronger now because of this crisis, and David was learning that sometimes the most important part of solving a problem isn't the solution itself, but how you involve the community in creating that solution. 2 weeks later, when the first parent advisory committee meeting was held, 12 parents showed up ready to work. Mrs. Rodriguez was elected chairperson, and her first official act was to propose that the committee should include student representatives too. After all, she said with a smile, this whole thing started because one little girl wasn't afraid to ask for what her school needed. 1 year later, David stood at the back of Riverside Elementary's auditorium, watching something he never could have imagined when this all started. The stage was set up, with computers, projectors, and a large screen showing student projects. Parents, teachers, school board members, and even some reporters were packed into the audience for the first annual Riverside Technology Showcase. But what made David's heart swell with pride wasn't the fancy equipment or the media attention. It was watching Zara, now 9 years old, confidently explaining to a room full of adults how she had built a simple game to help kindergarten students learn their letters. The idea came to me when I was helping in Mrs. Peterson's classroom, Zara said into the microphone, not a trace of nervousness in her voice. The little kids were having trouble remembering which letters make which sounds, so I thought, what if learning letters could be like playing a fun game? She clicked to the next slide showing her colorful animated program. When you click on a letter, an animal appears that starts with that sound, like A for alligator, B for butterfly. And if you get 5 right in a row, you unlock a special, dancing banana. The audience laughed and David smiled. The dancing banana had been Kevin's idea during one of their weekend coding sessions. Kevin was up next, presenting a project that even David found impressive. I created a program that helps track water usage at our school, the 10-year-old explained. Every day I input how much water we use in the cafeteria, the bathrooms, and for cleaning. The program creates graphs that show patterns and helps the school save money and help the environment. Mrs. Garcia, sitting in the front row, nodded approvingly. Kevin's program had already helped the school reduce water waste by 15%. Lisa's presentation was different but equally amazing. She had used the graphic design software to create a digital newsletter for the school, complete with student artwork, photos from school events, and even interviews with teachers and staff. Before we had good computers, I could only draw with pencils and crayons, Lisa explained. Now I can create digital art, design layouts, and even make animations. But the best part is that now I can share my art with everyone in the school, not just hang it on my bedroom wall. As David watched these 3 kids present their work, he thought about how much had changed in just 1 year. The Riverside Technology Partnership had grown far beyond what anyone had originally envisioned. The Parent Advisory Committee, led by Mrs. Rodriguez, had become a model for other schools. They met monthly to review the program's progress, suggest improvements, and ensure that the technology was being used in ways that supported the whole child, not just their computer skills. The parent technology classes had been so popular that they were now offered twice a week. Adults were learning everything from basic computer skills to advanced programming. 3 parents had already gotten better jobs because of skills they learned in these classes, and 2 had started their own small technology businesses. The mentorship program had expanded too. What started with volunteers from Digital World Corporation coming twice a week had grown into a network of professionals from all over the city. Engineers, programmers, graphic designers, and web developers donated their time to work with students who showed special interest in technology careers. But the changes weren't just at Riverside Elementary. Word of the program's success had spread to other schools, and David's company was now working with 5 more schools in the district. Each program was different, customized based on the specific needs and ideas of students, teachers, and parents at each school. More importantly, other companies had started their own educational partnerships. The success at Riverside had shown that meaningful community investment was possible and profitable in ways that went far beyond traditional measures. David was pulled from his thoughts when he heard his name being called. Mrs. Garcia was inviting him to the stage to say a few words as he walked up to the microphone. David looked out at the audience and saw faces that had become familiar over the past year. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had gone from skeptical opponent to trusted partner. Mrs. Johnson, whose computer classes were now among the most popular in the school. Carlos, Jennifer, and Rachel from his own company, who had become as invested in this program as he was. A little over a year ago, David began, I was just another businessman walking through a fancy lobby thinking about profit margins and quarterly reports. Then I met a little girl who asked me a simple question. Could I help her school get better computers? He paused, finding Zara in the audience. She was sitting with her mother, beaming with pride. What I thought would be a simple donation of some equipment turned into the most important project I've ever been part of. Not because of the technology, but because of what I learned about listening. David looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. I learned that the best ideas come from the people who will actually use what you're building. I learned that sustainable change requires real partnership, not just good intentions. And I learned that when you invest in education, you're not just helping kids learn skills, you're helping them discover what's possible. He clicked to a slide showing statistics from the past year. Test scores in math and reading had improved across all grade levels. Student engagement was up. Teacher satisfaction was higher. But more than that, students were choosing to stay after school to work on technology projects. They were helping each other learn. They were excited about their future in ways that went far beyond just computer skills. But the most important thing I learned, David continued, is that change doesn't happen because one person decides to help. Change happens when a whole community decides to work together. He gestured toward the parent advisory committee members sitting together in the 3rd row. These parents didn't just accept our program, they made it better. They asked hard questions, demanded real accountability, and insisted that we include their voices in every decision. He nodded toward the teachers in the audience. These educators didn't just use new equipment, they reimagined how to teach. They learned new skills, tried new approaches, and never stopped putting their students first. Finally, he looked at the students scattered throughout the audience. And these young people didn't just learn to use computers. They learned to solve problems, to think creatively, and to believe that they can build the future they want to see. David paused, thinking about how to end his speech. Zara, when you approached me in that lobby, you weren't just asking for computers. You were asking for opportunity. You were asking for someone to believe that kids like you and your friends deserve the same chances as kids in wealthier schools. You were asking for justice. The room was completely quiet now. Today, looking at everything you've all accomplished, I want to say thank you. Thank you for teaching me that business success and community impact aren't separate goals. They're the same goal. Thank you for showing me that the best investment a company can make is in the dreams of young people. As applause filled the auditorium, David stepped away from the microphone and walked over to where Zara was sitting. She stood up and gave him a hug. So, he said quietly, what's your next big idea? Zara grinned. Well, I've been thinking about the high school. Their science lab is pretty old, and I bet if we talk to them... David laughed. I should have known you wouldn't stop with just one school. As the event continued with more student presentations and demonstrations, David realized that this story wasn't ending, it was just beginning. The Riverside Technology Partnership had shown what was possible when businesses, schools, and communities worked together as true partners. But more than that, It had shown the power of listening to young people who aren't afraid to ask for what they need. Sometimes the most profound changes start with the simplest questions, asked by the people who have the most to gain from the answers. 6 months later, when Zara presented her plan for improving the high school science lab to the school board, David was there in the audience ready to listen to whatever big idea she had next. Because he had learned that when kids like Zara start talking about making their schools better, the smartest thing adults can do is pay attention. After all, they might just change your life while they're changing the world.